In the 24 years since the first Final Destination movie was released, the world, society, and cinema have changed, resulting in some harsh realities upon a rewatch. The first installment of the franchise was released in 2000, setting up its future as a franchise, which saw a further 4 movies: Final Destination 2, Final Destination 3, The Final Destination, and Final Destination 5. The latest edition, Final Destination, Bloodlines, will be released in 2025, but hopefully won't recreate the first film's mistakes. Of course, Final Destination is a product of its time. A lot of things in society have changed since the year 2000, and so there are elements of the film that aren't appropriate now that were at the time. 2000's horror movies, in particular, were a staple of their time, especially with the surge in the subgenre of slasher films. Even though Final Destination is still a brilliant watch 24 years after its initial release, some things just don't hold up in our modern era. Final Destination lacked in diversity. The film's cast could have been a better reflection of the real world. Despite Final Destination's large cast, it lacked diversity in multiple ways. Most of the film's characters are white, which shouldn't have been the case for an ensemble cast of its size. Throughout the film, only 3 actors of color are seen with lines of dialogue, 2 are side characters, and only 1 is in a prominent role, Tony Todd as William Bloodworth. The characters are also predominantly straight, and while LGBTQ+ representation in movies wasn't as focused on in 2000, it's still disappointing that there wasn't more diversity in the group of people subjected to these deaths. 5. The use of gender archetypes. Final Destination relied on traditional gender roles for its characters. Ollie Larder as Clear Rivers looking scared on the plane in Final Destination, 2000. While Final Destination had a good balance in terms of gender, its women were undoubtedly treated differently than the male characters. Traditional gender roles are heavily used throughout the film, with women portrayed as damsels in distress compared to men as big action heroes. A great example of this is Clear, Ollie Larder, who is perceived as quiet and mysterious but still needs to be protected by the protagonist, Alex, Devon Sawa, and is frequently dependent on him. Though she does have her moments of strength, the character is generally stereotyped as passive and reliant on men. 4. Borrowing from Scream. Final Destination's success can be attributed to other 2000s horror movies. Drew Barrymore in Scream and Devon Sawa, Ollie Larder, and Kerr Smith in Final Destination. While the Final Destination franchise made its mark in the horror genre, it's easy to forget that its basic structure and certain elements were borrowed from elsewhere. After the release of Scream in 1996, the late 90s and early 2000s were rife with teen horror dramas, and the parody movie went on to inspire titles such as Bride of Chucky and I Know What You Did Last Summer. While the characters of Final Destination were predestined to die, the audience's constant predictions of how each of them may reach their end can be compared to Scream's use of horror tropes. 3. Final Destination's cheesy deaths. Over-the-top performances made some deaths funny, rather than scary. Despite Final Destination's attempt at being dramatic, which it does well, the film nonetheless has its fair share of cheesy moments, especially in the case of some of the gruesome deaths. A great example of this is the scene in which death finally catches up to Todd Wagner, Chad E. Donella, with a blue liquid stalking him through his bathroom. This scene sets up many ways he could possibly succumb to death, as he spends several minutes going to the toilet, cutting himself shaving, and plucking his nose hairs, with his demise slowly approaching. While it appeared he'd die by drowning or bleeding out from his shaving cut, Todd instead slips and falls into his makeshift washing line across the bath, strangling himself. Of course, this is still a scary way to die, but Donella's performance was a bit too over the top. Terry's, Amanda Detmer, death can also be considered cheesy, although less obvious than Todd's. After breaking up with her boyfriend, the teenager rants before being hit by a bus in one swift motion, a scene that unintentionally parallels Regina George's accident in Mean Girls.